this is the final day of the forum, and quite aptly, it is absolutely unfiltered. Well, the first subject that we have for today, moving countries. It is never easy. The logistics of it all, the expectations, the reality, and then the culture shock. And who better to tell us about the experience than people who've been there and done that? So, to begin with, let's tackle the topic of relocation from the lens and the perspective of a tech expat. On our panel, we have Andrew Chang, Director of ASUS, AICS, an AI machine learning team and internal incubator. He supports tech for good and entrepreneurs who want to make a difference in the world. He moved from the US to Singapore. Florbela Lai is a senior software engineer at Google and has worked full stack on various Google products and projects in California and Singapore. She's passionate about growing and nurturing the community of women and minorities in technology. Julien Labruyere is the CEO and co-founder of Sleek, a one-stop shop digital platform for setting up and running a business in Singapore and Hong Kong. Julien has been living in Singapore for about 12 years. He moved here from France. And moderating this panel is Anna Ratala. Anna is the CEO and co-founder of Zwook. Zwook is an AI platform that matches brands with podcasts for targeted ads and interviews. Currently based in New York, Anna has lived and worked across 3 continents and 5 countries, including Singapore. She is, in fact, the founder of Slush Singapore. I'm sure the panel would love your questions, so please find that Q&A function on Zoom and submit them. Reflect your name and city. We'd like to know that a little bit about you and upvote the questions that you like the most. And like I said, bring on the difficult questions. We want to have the difficult questions because today is supposed to be unfiltered. Anna, take it over, please.
Thank you so much, Neha. Good morning, everybody, or good evening, depending on where you are watching the session. Super excited to kick off the final day of Singapore Tech Forum. And as Neha mentioned, today's sessions are all about being unfiltered, which means that you're going to hear very real insights, honest conversations and reflections from our panelists who have moved across the globe to another country, another culture, and they're going to actually share their experiences about how everything went along. We have decided to divide the session into kind of 2 sections. So we're going to be talking about personal reflections on moving into a new country, what the expectations have been, what has matched the expectations, and what has maybe not matched the expectations, where any possible culture shocks may have been. And then we're also going to be talking a little bit about Singapore and Southeast Asia as a location, and what are some of the opportunities that this region actually provides, particularly professionals in the tech field. And then, of course, towards the end, we will be happy to take any of your questions. So please make sure to use that Q&A function and type in your questions so we can address that. And as Neha mentioned, be honest. And now I would love to bring on board our panelists, Florbela, Andrew, and Julien, so we can kick off. Welcome to the panel. And let's start with a little bit of a warm-up. Every time we make a decision in our life, particularly moving countries, right, there are certain factors, pull and push factors that really affect that decision, right? Some of those factors are external, like a job, a salary, a cost level of a destination, and some of them are internal, like self-fulfillment, adventure, desire to experience new cultures. So let's kick off with asking actually all of our panelists to share a little bit about your motivations to move to Singapore. What were some of the internal and external factors that affected that? And what were some of the motivations? So maybe we can start with Florbela. You moved to Singapore 4 years ago, right?
Yes, that's correct. I was at a point in my life where I wanted to try something new, and moving to a different country seemed like an exciting thing to do. So looking around the globe, I pinned down on Singapore because I work for Google and they were starting a new Eng office here. And so that seemed like a great place to start on a new team and also have the ability to travel to different places in Asia. Yeah.
That's great. And I guess, Andrew, you moved 2 years ago, and for you, it was, I guess, a combination between pull and push factors. Like you were already working across different time zones, and then you had some other consideration factors. So why don't you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So at the time when Florbela was considering Singapore and other areas, we were both thinking about where do we want to go next, because we were living in the San Francisco Bay Area and for quite some time, and we wanted exposure to a new place, get some new new experience and learn new things. And so I was already spending a lot of time in China at the time, ramping up manufacturing for my previous startup. And Singapore again came up a lot because of it was just so close to what I was doing in China, and it just became an easy way for us to make that transition. But Florbela moved first, and I'm basically following her around the world, wherever she wants to go.
Absolutely. And then Julien, you moved from France 14 years ago, and you had a sort of a very, I guess, process-driven, decision-making, really looking into Singapore and pros and cons at the time. So share a little bit about your decision-making process.
Hi, yeah, sure, Anna. So back in France, I was offered the choice to go to two different places, which was Canada and Singapore at that time. And my company was kind enough. So my wife made the choice of Singapore, basically. Long story short, because we had been in Canada already, and it seemed a bit exotic to be in Singapore, which I thought was kind of part of China, which is very untrue. It's like 4 hours flight from there. But my company sent me here for 2 weeks, like touristic discovery trip to meet my maybe future colleagues until I made the decision to finally move here. So it was kind of a low risk choice, and I would encourage people to take a trip and spend time here to see how it feels. And so for me, it was coming as an expat, good package after spending 2 weeks holidaying here with my wife was pretty cool and very little risk in the end. Yes.
Well, that's very interesting. And of course, what you're sharing when you come to a new country, right? And many actually expats, I think, take the opportunity to come down for a little while, maybe do a little holiday and take a look at the location. Of course, very often the reality of living in a country is very different from visiting it for a couple of weeks, and it's everything so amazing, and you I think have a very positive impression on the new country. So let's talk a little bit about that honeymoon versus reality phase, right? So I think we have all heard sort of the different phases of a culture shock, right? When people move to a new country, there's the honeymoon phase, there's frustration, there's adjustment, and then there's acceptance. We're not going to drill down into each of those, but let's just kind of talk a little bit about the difference between the honeymoon phase and the actual reality, right? When that starts kicking in. So Florbela and Andrew, you, I understand, made a bit of a matrix of the Singapore before you actually moved over on the different pros and cons and what you liked, and I guess really painting some expectations, right? So why don't you share with us a little bit about what those expectations were in your matrix, and when you actually arrived, how well did Singapore meet those expectations? Really, were there any surprises and something that you did not expect?
Yeah, so the matrix included a bunch of other cities, and then on the other axis we had like the qualities that we wanted to look for. So the two major factors that we looked at was job opportunity and also ability to travel. And in both of those dimensions, I think Singapore really knocked it out of the park. We've, over the past 4 years, traveled to 9 countries, I think. And in some of those countries, we've been back maybe 2 or 3 times. And if it wasn't for COVID, we would still be traveling. And in terms of job opportunity, I will talk about this a bit more later. But again, it was a new eng department, got to make a lot of impact. and see a team really grow. Other things that we considered were climate, safety. Singapore is one of the safest countries in the world. Yeah, that's pretty much the most important factors. So one thing that we did not factor in a bit is distance from family. And that is like kind of took us by surprise. We find it pretty difficult to keep in touch with family who's living on the other side of the world.
Yeah, and that's actually a really interesting point. We'll touch upon the family aspect a little later as well. Julien, when you moved, it was 14 years ago, and I can imagine your life was pretty different 14 years ago, and also Singapore was pretty different 14 years ago. When you were making some of those considerations, I think this is probably true for a lot of us people, when we move, we think, oh, we're going to spend somewhere a couple of years, maybe a few years, and then you end up spending 14 years and life is very different. Would you say that those consideration points that you had in the beginning 14 years ago for Singapore, do they still stand? Like when you were excited about something in Singapore 14 years ago, are those the same things you're excited about right now? Do you value the same things? Has it changed? Would you have preferred to think about 14 years ahead when you were choosing your destination? Or
yeah, I think very much my thinking about Singapore has evolved. I feel I had different lives already. I came here as a young expat, 25, so I was partying pretty much every evening, traveling every weekend with my wife to beautiful places. Just 2 hours flight, you have like fantastic beaches in Indonesia, Philippines, or you can do trekking and everything. So that was really amazing life for like 4 or 5 years. And at some point I reached a bit of a stage of boredom or routine, which was like, okay, traveling all the time is so cool, right? But I think Singapore is working so well as a country that it gets a bit too predictable sometimes, and you feel a bit of the awkward situation or unexpected stuff. And I was thinking like, okay, feel a bit, or maybe I should think about moving something else. But obviously, everything is working so well in Singapore. You get a good job opportunity, everything, that you end up staying, right? And every year you think about moving next year, but it doesn't happen. And so after that, I had my second life in Singapore so far is having kids, where it completely reinvents the whole equation, and I'm finding a lot of enjoyment being here with my 2 young boys, go to local school and everything, and having a place that is good for them is super important for me. And so as a family man, no longer as a post teenager, I quite enjoy my new life in Singapore.
Well, that sounds great. And I mean, I think we can all probably agree on sort of the good, positive things that Singapore brings along. And for our audience, if there's anything that you've ever heard about Singapore in terms of the good things, the safety, the ease of life, it's all really very true. But because the session is called Unfiltered, let's also dig into maybe some of the culture shocks or some of the things that were surprising, or maybe any moments that you felt like it doesn't have to necessarily be about Singapore, but more about like the life away from your home country. Andrew, do you want to address that a little bit? Did you have any moments where you were like, what am I doing here? Like, this was not as cool as I thought it was year one, right? Like, you've been here a couple of years now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would just, before that, I would just echo what Julien is saying, because Florbela and I are more towards that earlier phase evolution of Julien's journey. And we're now also thinking about, and which I agree with, there's just so much to do here and so much to explore, as being young is just a great place to be. And then also, as we start to think about starting our own families, talking to other expats and people that are starting families here, we also realize that it's a nice place to have family and have kids and give them exposure to new things, give them exposure to different languages, peoples, religion, cultures, things like that. So there's a lot of great things there about Singapore, the diversity. It's just very, very rich. And each country is very different from each other as well. And so there's a lot of learning involved when you get here, because of the differences between the cultures. When you think about Southeast Asia, it's really a collection of different countries and languages and religions and ways of life. And so which is very interesting, and for me personally, I've grown a lot more just to learn more about the world, and it definitely feels a lot more global here versus when you're in the U.S. There's a lot more. The U.S. is so big that's mostly what you think about. But here, Singapore is relatively small, so you think about the rest of the world. And so when because I'm an entrepreneur and I'm thinking about markets and building companies, building new products, when we think about Southeast Asia, it is a pretty fragmented market, and so the differences there it makes it a bit more difficult to build a product, because the markets here just outside of Singapore are not homogenous, not like the U.S. So from day one, I think a lot of startups here think more regionally. And that's both a strength and a challenge. Going more to the personal things of expectations meeting reality, I would say that most things that Florbela and I were talking about, and the matrix and stuff like that, mostly met our expectations. I think that's one surprising thing is Singapore is very comfortable of a place. It's easy to come here and get acquainted with Southeast Asia, because people speak English here. We speak 4 different languages here, and so nationally, right? Many more than that, but nationally. And so it's easy to come here, it's easy to get acquainted, and then it's easy to explore the region from Singapore. I would say the one thing, the downside that I miss the most is trees, green space, outdoor space, mountains, because I come from California, and I love spending time in the mountains and stuff. And we don't really have that here in Singapore. So we would travel somewhere else, to get that.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true for a lot of. I mean, being in New York here, I could really relate to that as well, to the kind of missing the green and the parks and everything. I want to touch upon one thing that Florbela, you also mentioned before, which is when you live, regardless of where it is, in Singapore, elsewhere in the world, when you've traveled away, you really are 12 hours, 25 hours away from your family, right, from your immediate family on the other side of the globe, and that's, I think, personally, at least for me, has been probably one of the biggest challenges living in another country and in another culture even, right? And what's been really interesting from my perspective, and I'd love to sort of hear what your reflections on that, is that oftentimes you think that your best friends that you make are the ones that you've, met maybe in high school or in college, and they kind of become, and you don't really meet and get new good friends as adults. But I think when you're living as a foreigner in a new country, your friends actually become your family. So you start actually building a second group of incredibly strong relationships with people that you've literally just met. And it might even be that your paths would never normally cross if you were in your home country, but because you all are going through the same experiences, you somehow really link very strongly together. And so while you sort of miss your family and can't see them as much as usual, you sort of start having this new set of people that become incredibly close. Do you have reflections on some of that, Florbela? Have you found that that's true from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. So I mainly meet people through my work, and because Google is such a big company, there's a lot of different people there. And I joined, like, for example, a running group where I met a lot of close friends that we hang out. We used to hang out pretty frequently. And yeah, they have become basically a second family to me. But also, for my real family, technology has made it possible to keep in touch as much as we possibly can. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Julien, so from your perspective, why don't we talk a little bit about I guess cultural differences, right? Because it's not just about moving countries, especially when you move from sort of the Western world into the Asian world. I think a lot of people would find it interesting to see what were some of the biggest, I think, cultural differences that you had to get acquainted to and learn and maybe even be surprised by.
I think the first surprise is the avoidance of conflict in Asian culture. So I think, coming from France, we like to argue about things, and that's kind of a natural way of problem solving, or at least identifying the problem in the first place, right? Whereas when I came in Asia, I was like, everybody's smiling, everybody's telling me yes. And yet I know they disagree, and I know I'm not getting shit done, right? So it was kind of the first cultural shock and adjustment to be more careful in listening and finding the the cues of disagreement. And so that's more professional, the big one. And personal is I still find it strange that although I have many local Singaporean friends, we don't get to one another's house that often for dinners or lunches. And I think there is this concept of the intimate circle is it's not easy to get into with locals, where it's much easier. I guess to go barbecue and go to some friends in other places, but it doesn't mean that the friendship are less sincere and authentic. I think it's just different ways. But that was my bit of surprise. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess, this is actually an interesting thing, especially I think in Singapore, I guess in many other places as well, but Singapore is such a soft landing coming from abroad, right? And this whole expat life, if you wish, is a real concept in Singapore, right? I mean, many people who move to Singapore, very many are sent by their companies. And so you're kind of living this really comfortable life in these condominiums with all the amenities. And then, a lot of expats travel, for example, on public holidays, right? So there are people that have never really celebrated Diwali or Hari Raya, for example, in Singapore, right? So you live in your own little expat bubble in a way for the first maybe a couple of years. And then once you start realizing that, maybe we're actually going to be staying for a little longer, then you have this, I think, intrinsic need to really go out there and experience the culture even more and kind of immerse yourself more into that culture. And that's when you, I think, start paying attention to things like, okay, maybe I want to be interacting more with locals or celebrating some of these holidays or moving away from a condo where 90% of the people are expats from Europe, right? And actually go and live with the locals and things like that. So in a way, though, it can be a good thing, right? Because it's an easy landing for anybody coming to Singapore. But then you also kind of want to make sure that you don't get stuck in that bubble if you really want to experience the culture. Andrew, do you feel like you've been now for 2 years in Singapore? Are you kind of already out of the expat bubble or mixing in with the kind of becoming more Singaporean, or?
Yeah, I would say that for me, I was really interested in the local tech ecosystem here and meeting local entrepreneurs. So I kind of came out of that bubble fairly quickly, but it is a nice soft landing here. There is a US bubble. It's very comfortable. You can meet with other US expats. A lot of people from California are here, from San Francisco Bay Area, New York, things like that. And it was good. Those were my first friends that were here. They helped to share more about what's the landscape. A lot of people that were here before me helped make introductions to other people that are locals, and and I made my own. And then what Julien said is there are circles, and networks of people, and I got lucky. I guess I got connected to one of those local ones relatively early on, and that helped really to transition to learning more about Singapore and the tech ecosystem here. How are businesses started? How do people think about business formation here? What does the venture capital landscape look like? Things like that, which is very different from the San Francisco Bay Area, and the mindset's very different. And when you think about starting companies, is different. Valuation's different. It's a much less mature market here than it is in the U.S., right? And so it was really wonderful to learn about all these different characteristics. And again, it added a lot to my personal growth about how to think about building new companies and thinking about products, especially in this side of the world. But yeah, going back to your point, there are expat bubbles here, and that does help to make a nice introduction to Singapore, and then from there, hopefully to other areas of Singaporean life and Southeast Asia.
And I think if I just may add on that, I think what really makes it so cool to be in Singapore is to be able to travel between these bubbles. like sometimes I feel I just want to be like in France with my French friends, drinking French wine and Frenchies, and have just that. And and 5 minutes later you move back to your Asian bubble, right? And the local bubble where you go hit at the hawker center and have the local experience. And having that, I think, is pretty unique about Singapore, is the ability to move between your bubbles, seamlessly, very easily. And that's really what makes it such a unique place, I think. Plus the density of interesting people, I would say, in other words. I think, the people you find here are all well connected and somehow, it's really very interesting. A lot of them, the conversation and the people you bump into are super interesting, one way or another. And it's really cool and diverse, of course, in terms of background. So it's really the hub kind of concept where it's really cool.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think that's like, there's really a mix. I think Singapore is one of the sort of global hubs in the world where you can find people from literally anywhere. Like, you want to hang out with people from California, you can do that. People from like a particular region, maybe in France. Like, I'm from Finland. We've got 5 million people in the whole country, and there's like 1,000 Finns living in Singapore. So if you want to go to a sauna, you can do that, right? Or you want to vent a little bit about something that's like, that only another Finn would understand. You definitely find somebody to do that with. So that's definitely a pro as well. Andrew, did you want to add something?
I was going to say that one of my favorite dinners, or it was a brunch that Florbela and I went to a few years ago now. But we were having dim sum. It was not a fancy restaurant or anything like that, but it was more about the people that we were with. We had a fairly big group of people, one really large, I think 10 people around the table, and almost everyone was from a different country. And it was just so amazing to be surrounded by that, and just the types of conversations we were having was just amazing, and still one of my favorite dinners that we've had here.
Yeah, the diversity is really very mind-blowing. And like you mentioned, there are 4 official languages in Singapore as it is, plus there's just tons more with regards to just expats coming in. Well, let's talk a little bit more. I mean, Andrew, you already kind of mentioned this a little bit before, the sort of the opportunities that Singapore and Southeast Asia in particular, this is Singapore Tech Forum, right? Let's talk a little bit more about those opportunities that this whole region, provides. So Singapore being obviously the kind of the tech and the innovation in the business hub of Southeast Asia, but as a region, it is 600 million people, over 600 million people, right? Rapidly developing markets, and especially when it comes to technology, right? There are markets that are really leapfrogging in terms of their development. They're completely bypassing certain stages that we've had in the West. I think a great example is, for example, Indonesia, right? And the fintech ecosystem there. So the country of 200 million people went from basically using cash to using mobile payments, and kind of bypass the credit card stage, which in a lot of countries, for example, in Europe, it was a relatively long stage of people using using cards. So really interesting developing region. And I think a lot of the people, at least based on my experience, when I speak to people and said, hey, I've lived in Singapore for 8 years, most people don't really know that much about particularly the innovation and the tech ecosystem. So let's kind of unpack that a little bit. And Florbela, I'd love to start with you, because obviously you've been with Google, and Google has some really interesting initiatives in the Asia Pacific region in general, and then obviously also in Singapore addressing Southeast Asia. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So Google has, for the last several years, spent a lot of effort in developing products for the so-called next billion users. So these are users who did not grow up owning a computer. Their first encounter with the internet is on the phone, and they're not particularly tech savvy. So one of the products that came out of this effort was Google Pay for India. So we started from the ground up developing this product for India. And it did exactly what you mentioned about Indonesia, where like the population there was and still is mostly cash-based. And we are transitioning those groups of people directly to digital payments. Like a lot of them did not have credit cards. So this was such a success story that Google is pouring a lot of resources into this product, and also we're expanding to the rest of the world. And so this is a testament to how when companies focus on a growing, developing market, the lessons that we learn in that market, it is actually applicable to the rest of the world, because you're making products better for this less tech savvy group of people. So yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, I'd love to tap it. So sort of these opportunities that the region provides. What do you, Andrew, if you want to kind of continue from there? And I know that you've said before that you also have, a lot of people in your own sort of network that have thought about, having an international experience as well. What do you think these opportunities that even Florbela was talking about, what does that mean for the sort of the tech talent elsewhere in the world? What are some of the opportunities that open up to talent?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, I would just say that there's enormous opportunity now across the board. I mean, our team is hiring right now across the board, across product and engineering and various leadership roles, and we can't find in addition to us, I know that a lot of other companies right now are hiring fairly aggressively. That's U.S. technology companies, that's Chinese technology companies, that's also Southeast Asian, local companies like Grab and Gojek and stuff. So there's a lot of demand for very strong top talent and people that have a lot of different experiences. And so, personally, from my perspective, it's really interesting to be living here at this time, because Southeast Asia is growing significantly and going through a transformation. Every time you travel, when you go there, it changes a little bit, and you can see things change. It is it's just because these economies now are just embracing technology. A lot of cases, and you mentioned 600 million people, right? Like a lot of these people are coming onto the internet for the first time in a lot of cases, and their smartphones is like their first gateway to technology, and so their perception and their mental models are different from myself and where I come from, US and with a computer first, right? And then smartphone many years later. So it's really, really interesting. The way people use technology here is different. The use cases are different, and it's evolving a lot faster, it feels like here. And I would also say that it's a really interesting time too, because there is a lot of growth across US tech, China tech, and this Southeast Asia tech. And so there's really, it kind of interesting to see these influences, and how different teams think about product and build product and run their teams. And I think there's a unique opportunity for people to come here that love to be at the intersection of different ideas, intersection of different worlds, intersection of different organizations, to come here and help build and foster more community across these ecosystems.
Absolutely, very good points. And I think to continue from there, that also has now opened up tremendous opportunities for startups, right? For tech startups, and this whole tech startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia in general, but especially obviously in Singapore, and Singapore's government big push and support towards new companies and new startups is really interesting. And what I find really interesting, and kind of having been in the tech startup ecosystem in Singapore through Slush Singapore and through other initiatives, what's really interesting is a lot of the high growth companies and a lot of the sort of business ideas in Southeast Asia are also coming from the fact that one of you mentioned before that Southeast Asia is a very fragmented market. So if you have a company in the United States that's doing really well, for you to actually expand to Southeast Asia or to Asia in general, it's going to be incredibly hard if you don't have the knowledge and the know-how, right? Because it's like 12 different cultures. It's not Asia. It's not one country and one culture. There are Malaysia is different from Indonesia, is different from Thailand, different from, Vietnam, which has opened tremendous opportunities for a lot of tech startups in Singapore saying, hey, well, there's a company in the United States, they do this. We could do the same, except we localize because we know we have people sitting in 5 different countries. So we're actually able to build something for this market and then later be acquired by maybe that US company. And for the tech talent, that obviously means they still need people to come and code those products and build them, right? So it's tremendous opportunities for the tech talent. I want to shift over to Julien, because Julien, you're actually running a startup or scale up, I guess, in a sense, and you've also seen this support from the Singapore government and the push for the Singapore government towards new organizations, all these schemes where they help you employ people and give you government funding. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and those opportunities for companies?
Yep, I think the first thing I'd like to say is that Singapore government is really good to at cutting on the red tape and the bureaucracies, which I mean, coming from France, I hate that. And so, for example, where I think the government is very intent, they have money. I think first that's the thing to realize. They have a lot of money and cash reserve to support the economy in bad times, and you can definitely see that when they move, it has quite a big impact. And the lovely part is, so we have about 80 people employed in Singapore full time. And when COVID hit, like very quickly, within a month or 2, I don't remember, we got like very significant checks from the government to support local salaries. And as a result, we were not forced to cut any on the jobs. And all that without submitting any document, which is amazing. So based on our contribution to the local pension fund, they were able to calculate, and that was the basis of calculation. And they know they have this very smart payment system that is linked to your company identity number, where they send it on this payment rails and it lands on your account without doing anything. And I just find it like magical, being a job like an entrepreneur, to not have to do anything. And so that is the extent of like, you live in the future, even on the government, I think, in terms of supporting the economy. And when they want to drive adoption of cloud accounting, for example, which is my space as a startup, then they start like giving grants to people to adopt, move from paper to digital, and then all SMEs get almost free or very highly subsidized subscription to move to cloud accounting. So I think that's what you feel is that when the government decides something, because it's a small country and the government is quite strong, I think they have the money. I think they move the needle really quick, and everybody aligns. So it's not like lengthy debate that I use less, like sometimes about unproductive stuff. So I think I like that. It's really run like with the efficiency in mind, and I like that as a founder here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do apologize if you hear some New York sounds from the background. There are some fire trucks outside, apparently. But great. So we have gotten some questions from the audience. And indeed, if you still have questions for the panelists about their experiences and moving overseas, about Singapore or anything, please submit them through the Q&A section. Well, we could jump into some of those questions. And I can see, based on the questions, that people are very interested in your sort of personal experiences and digging a little bit more into that. And one of the questions that we got from this comes from Singapore. But what was the biggest culture shock for you? Like, really, is there any particular? And I think what people really are looking to is to maybe get a personal anecdote or a story or something, an example of where you felt like, wow, this was definitely something very different that I did not expect, and some getting used to. Florbela, is anything that comes to mind?
Not at the moment. Anyone else can feel free to jump in.
Do you want to jump in? I think you had some. Julien, you have?
Yeah, I can add. I think the culture shock here was really about not understanding the non-spoken communication when I was in business, where I was everybody was smiling to me. I was so sure we'd be closing this deal and the next deal and the next deal. And every time like came as big surprise. And so I think that was my kind of biggest culture shock. Is like, people don't say no to your face. It's like, yes, but, and with very insinuation. And I think that's really the tough part, but you get very used to it. So even I don't say no that often nowadays. It's more like just say a polite yes, but, and that's usually your way with it.
Absolutely. I can definitely relate to that. I think I was working in sales for the first few years when I got in Singapore, and I was chasing some clients like for weeks, and then my local colleagues were like, they're not gonna become. I said, but they haven't said no. They were like, well, continue. They're like, no, they're never gonna say no to you. You can chase them for a year, they will just disappear, and they will not stop responding, but they will not tell no to your face because it's very uncomfortable, right? So that's definitely one of the things. Andrew, did you want to add something?
Yeah, it's kind of along the same lines as Julien, in terms of building, doing business and things like that. It feels like Singapore and other Southeast Asian countries is more about relationships first, building those relationships, getting to know you as a person, and learning more about you and your family and things like that. Whereas in the U.S., it's a bit more different. It's more professional first. It's what do you do at work, and so on and so forth. So it feels like it's more relationship driven here than the U.S.
Absolutely. And one of the other things that I can add, and this actually kind of feeds into one of the questions that we got as well. But one of the things that I realized in the work culture is that there's still this hierarchy that exists. I mean, as modern as Singapore is, but there is a hierarchy within the sort of the work environment where you are supposed to kind of stay a little later. If your boss is staying late, you're supposed to show face. So remote working, I don't know. I've been, during this whole COVID period, I've been in New York. So it's really interesting based on what I've been hearing, that people are now actually working from home and are doing work. But back when things were in normal, it wasn't really like a default, right? So if you don't show up, then the understanding is that you don't really work, right? So kind of this trust factor wasn't necessarily always there across the different steps, and you would always have to report and show a lot, like I'm working because I'm here, I'm working because I'm typing an email, doesn't matter what it says, but it's like I am doing the work for the work's sake a little bit. So I don't know, maybe the COVID has changed a little bit of that culture. We did have a question from Nat, and Nat is asking, would you be able to share some of the intentional steps that you took for yourself or your family to fit in to Singapore, and also given the long working hours in the tech workspace, how do you find time to contribute to your adopted country, right? So Florbela, do you wanna kick us off? So anything in particular, any particular conscious steps that you took to really fit in and make Singapore feel like home and contribute, I guess, too?
Yeah, so actually when we first moved here, we took the intentional step of moving into an HDB actually. And that was like really in the middle of a really local neighborhood where the buildings were like from 50 years ago, and we really took time to get to know our neighbors upstairs and downstairs, and we would hang out with them a lot. So that was something that came to mind in intentional steps.
Yeah, and Singaporeans, I think, are very sort of welcoming towards things like that, right? When you are, and I think it's like everywhere, when you're interested in their culture and who they are, and saying, hey, you know what, I'm actually just moved here. That is something that obviously anybody's welcoming. Julien, do you have something to add?
Yeah, a slightly different perspective maybe is that you don't even have to do any strong intent move to get accepted here, because Singaporeans are very used to international faces and people, and they are super welcoming and friendly and nice people who speak good English, everyone. So it doesn't take, so it's not like, I guess it's like not landing in Paris as a foreigner. It's very smooth, and you don't have to do any any dramatic move and you know, and strong strong effort to get in and to fit in. I think it's just very smooth, and I think that's my answer to the question from now.
Actually, I forgot to mention something. In terms of volunteer opportunities, I actually participated in a lot of recruiting events that Google initiated at the local universities. And through that, I got connected with a lot of women in tech groups. And so in that way, I did quite a lot of volunteering. And that was also my mix into the local scene.
Yeah, and that's actually a great way to get and to give back, both give back, but also understand really kind of the local culture, engage with students, engage with like women in particular, industry. We did a lot of work with student volunteers through /Singapore, so that was great to get to know the youth culture of Singapore. And oh my God, the future is very bright for that country. I can tell that based on the students. Andrew, do you want to address? There's another question. What are some of advice that you have to fit into the culture or to integrate into the community of the new country that you moved into? So any particular advice how to kind of immerse and integrate into that culture? And is there anything that you can do beforehand, or does that happen once you're actually?
Yeah, sure. I would echo basically what both Florbela and Julien said. It is a fairly easy place to integrate in here. People are quite warm and welcoming, and they a lot of times when you go to a local hawker stall or in small business, a lot of the aunties and uncles, they like to talk to you and they want to know where you're from and all of that. And then over time, Florbela and I, we come to have some favorite stalls that we go to all the time that are now, our go-to places for chicken rice and things like that, and kopi, which is basically coffee and kaya toast. And I mean, so it's a lot easier, I think, than we had thought. However, there are still other tools that can help for people that are thinking about moving here and learning more and integrating. There are a lot of Facebook groups that you can join even beforehand, where you can, there are a bunch of expat Facebook groups, for example, where you can learn more about networking events. You can post questions and people will respond. It's quite active, so you'll get a response within a few hours. And then there's also different Facebook groups for different local expat bubbles that are living in Singapore. So you could also join one of those as well, and that can be helpful. That can help with pre-planning as well as if folks are interested in moving out here, I definitely recommend spending like a week here, and then you could use that time to also try to connect with some of those people in those Facebook groups, because people are quite active and they like meeting others. They like helping others as well. And then if once you're here, in addition to all these other things, there is quite a few like with meetup.com and other things like that. It's pretty active. I mean, once COVID blows over and things like that, it's pretty active in terms of networking and getting to know people, across different industries and stuff. And so I definitely recommend checking out some of those tools.
That's really, really good advice, actually. And when you mentioned aunties and uncles, that really made me miss Singapore right now so much. And that was actually one of the culture shocks, I think, for me as well as Singlish, the language, right? Where you kind of, it really gets used, like a little used to, getting used to the way how Singaporeans speak English and throw in all these different dialects. And it's, and then you start doing that yourself at some point. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm becoming local now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, one thing about the coffee, right? The local coffee here, I personally like it a lot, and there's like this huge diagram of different versions of coffee that you can get, like coffee with milk, with sugar, with butter, and all these different things, combinations in between. Very fascinating in terms of just the culture and how that came to be, the fusion of cultures that led to this. So yeah, that was something that took some time to learn the coffee diagram, but fun.
Yeah, because they all have names. There's like different names to all.
Kopi, Kopi Okuson, Kopi Sudai, and all these things. Yes.
That's amazing. Well, here's another really interesting question from Jaslyn. Would you ever consider moving back to your home countries at some point, now that you've been comfortably acquainted to the Singapore culture? And I think this is a really interesting question of like, do you then actually sort of become like you just live in a different country, or is there ever at the back of your head this thought of like, you know what, one day I'm gonna go back? Julien, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm considering that, but I think I see the future for me is living in the two places. Enjoy the good season in France and see my friends and family just maybe 4 or 5 months in the year, and the rest of the time being in Singapore, because I think that's what I think is best for my different levels. So tax, obviously, weather. I don't like to enjoy the cold and rainy weather I get in my place in France in the winter. So I'd rather be in the sunshine, good temperature, everything. And still spend some time with the family and friends back home. So, but I don't see myself going back permanently in France, honestly.
Yeah. What about Florbela? Have you? I mean, 4 years is like you're kind of at the stage where like you're gonna stay for another 10 years, or you're gonna, consider venturing somewhere else. So.
Yeah, I think as Andrew mentioned, we really like it here. The only thing that I think is a major consideration for us is if we want to start a family, we would really like to be closer to, our parents, our siblings, and have the kids grow up together. That's a major decision factor.
I think that's a really big consideration point. I think everybody that I know of my, close network in Singapore that have been expats, the reasons why they have left. I mean, some have left for other job opportunities, but majority has actually left because of this exact reason, right? You want to be closer to your family, and when you start having kids, you want them to sort of have that large family around.
And if I may just add to that, on the other hand, I think it's pretty cool for my kids, for example, 4 and 6. They are bilingual in Chinese, English, or trilingual in French, right? And I think that is such a blessing. Like I had difficulties with language, like most French people have, and it's just amazing, right? So that is kind of counterbalance. I think you are giving them a chance that they would never get back home, to be exposed to so much diversity and culture. So I think that may alleviate a bit the pain of being far from relatives.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really valuable point, I think, for anybody to consider, right? When you're in that situation, that it's not all, bad. It's like you just have to weigh a little bit. There's one very concrete actually question, but I think that this will be interesting for a lot of people, and it's been upvoted as well as a question. And I think, Andrew, you'll probably be the best to answer, given that this is coming from Silicon Valley as well, from Ryan. And he's asking, I'm a recent, so I have a degree in U.S. college, and I'm looking for my first job. My goal is to find a way to move to Singapore. Does it make sense for me to get work experience in the Bay Area first? And if so, should I strive to apply for companies that have offices in Singapore? And I think generally, if you just kind of talk a little bit about whether it makes sense to have some certain types of experience elsewhere and come to Singapore as an expert, or sort of start with something in Singapore.
That's a really good question. Here's my perspective. Happy to hear what other folks think too, including Florbela and Julien. Since this guy is located in the San Francisco Bay Area already, I think it would make sense to try to find and he's a new grad, a recent grad, to find some experience there first before coming to Singapore. There are already a lot of technology companies that are set up headquarters, their APAC headquarters here, like Google, Facebook, Twitter, so on and so forth. And I think every year I see more and more US tech companies here. making a big presence, like Netflix, Amazon, so on and so forth, that are growing presence. So I would first probably try to start in the US first, because you're already there, get some experience, and then come over here. That's how I would do it. But I'm curious to hear what Florbela and Julien would think.
Yeah, I agree. So when I moved here, I found that the tech ecosystem here is really just starting, especially for the major big companies. And so they really appreciate having experience from other places in the world to add on to like, what are the best practices that we should follow here? And also to tie into an earlier question about people afraid to say no here. I think it really, you really need to practice saying no in other places before you come here. Because I find that like a lot of the new grads here, they don't tend to say no, and then they work themselves to death. Which was great for the initial product launch, but in terms of like sustainability and growing into a more mature product with good practices and processes in place so that you don't need to work yourself to death is very important.
And to answer Ryan's question, I think, I mean, my perspective on that is that, even if you're on the least privileged end of the spectrum of experience, which is being fresh grad, if you're in computer science, honestly, you can't be failing to land a job in Singapore unless you are a sociopath or something. But there is such an imbalance between supply and demand these days that, I think it's valid to get a shot at work at Facebook or Google in the Valley, make yourself a good name. I think that will make you super employable when you want to come to Singapore. But equally, you come with a good degree in computer science right now in Singapore, you can't be unemployed, honestly. There will be opportunities coming up and jumping at you, a few ones, I can swear. It's that imbalance, honestly. So I think whichever way you choose will work, I think.
Great. Well, we're coming towards the end of our session. And I think, I know that based on all of our experiences, I think, and what we've just shared, people are probably like, is Singapore really that great of a country? Because like we're just sharing so many amazing things, and I swear we're not paid to say this. These are really our experiences from living in Singapore, and it really is a very remarkable country to to consider if you're in the tech ecosystem especially. But I'd like to wrap up with one last question. This is sort of a shorter one, but it's an interesting one. If you were to move to a new country now, other than Singapore, where would you like to move and why? And this is like a shorter round. Let's start with Julien, with you.
No, I don't think I would move anywhere. Like I said, there is not so many places that are situated.
But if you had to, like, what would be the other? I think the question was more like, what's the next best choice?
The next best choice probably would be US or Australia if Elon Musk was finding a way to cut the travel time from France to Australia, which is horrible. So it's, US or Australia would be my next choice.
Andrew?
Well, if we would leave Singapore, it probably would be more for family, personal reasons. And so that would be probably going back to the US, so nothing exciting there. But from a professional perspective, there's no other place that I would rather be right now. We can't hear you, Anna, by the way.
Sorry. 2 minutes before the end, I did the traditional classic mistake. Florbela, did you have anything to add? What country?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as Andrew. Basically, we would move back to the US. But looking back when we were like 4 years ago making that matrix, I think Sydney came like a close second, but also we're pretty excited about Korea and Taiwan as well.
Well, there are a lot of great countries, but as we agreed, Singapore really is the top notch in the world. And with that, I'd like to end the session. Thank you so much, Julien, Andrew, Florbela, for great insights. I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed the conversations and have a great day or great evening wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.